haven't gotten around to you yet, let me say good morning and welcome in. So glad that you're here. Man, what an awesome time we had on Friday night. Was that not incredible? Thank you to all of our guys for all the work you put into the worship organization, for our elders for allowing us to put that on, all of our members for the terrific attendance that we had, a number of visitors, but a whole lot I know of our own, and we're grateful for that. Thank you. Appreciate you. Thanks so much. And then also our ladies, big time our ladies. I'm trying to be good, so I didn't eat any. It was hard, let me tell you. It's not usually that difficult for me, and it was hard looking at like a table and a half of cinnamon rolls. Remember the descriptors? Gooey, buttery, sugary. It was difficult. Thank you to our ladies for all the work that you put into that, too. It was really a terrific time. And now we have the Lord's Day to celebrate together. Howdy, fellas. What an awesome day this is. So for those coming in, I'll mention this. I know we were away last week. We missed you all. Had a great time on kind of a staycation, northwestern Arkansas, also for a few days. That was a whole lot of fun. Got to see our church family in Camdenton last week. So that was a good time as well. Appreciate the opportunity to be away, but please know we missed you more than we enjoyed being away. So just so you know that. Anyway, we're finishing up, for those who don't know, not like today, but we're getting super close to finishing up the gospel according to Luke, where the good doctor portrays Jesus as a man. And it's really sad that his time in his earthly state as a man is about to come to a close here. And we're in Luke 22. We're going to be starting in verse 1. And this will be the last feast of Passover that Jesus will, I hate to say enjoy, I don't know that it was that, but that he would celebrate anyway while he's on the earth. Now I have Feast of Passover in bunny ears for a purpose. It would be really easy to spend the entire class period on this subject. I'm going to try not to, okay? And just so you know, that's not my intention. If we need to spend more time on it, we can. But I feel like it's a pretty fascinating discussion about the Feast of the Passover right here. We'll do what we can. All right, so verse 1 of Luke 22. Now the Feast of Unleavened Bread drew near, which is called Passover. So if you're interested in this, Exodus chapter 12, it's not the whole chapter, but at least the first about 20 verses or so will deal pretty extensively with that when this is first introduced. This is one of the three major feasts of the Jews. Let's take just a minute and review without going back and reading all of Exodus 12, because it's not Exodus class, and we have much more that we need to cover. But let's review just a little bit. The Feast of Passover and the unleavened bread, they are not exactly the same thing, but they are in super close proximity to one another and are tied into each other. Can anyone remind us how this works? The Feast of Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread from Exodus 12. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Marty. Freed Hardman Bible class pays off, doesn't it, for sure. So what Marty just said, in case you didn't hear it, is that Feast of Passover is actually one day, and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread will be for a whole week. There's what's called the preparation day of the Passover. And by the way, the week of unleavened bread, the name kind of suggests it's a feast, and they're eating a lot of bread, not bread only, but they're eating a lot of bread, and it doesn't have any leaven in it, right? All right, so self-explanatory on that one. Well, there's the preparation day of the Passover. What's special about that day? Preparation day of the Passover. That's actually not the Passover feast observed, but as the name would suggest, it's making preparations for that very special day. What's the big blockbuster item that takes place on the preparation day of the Passover? First of all, I'm sorry. Very good. Very good. That's when the lamb is killed. It's prepared. Now, in Exodus 12, there's an order. This slaying of the Passover lamb after it's been set aside, kind of corralled or penned for 5 days on the 10th day of Nisan, used to be Abib, and the Jews have changed the name of that month. But the 10th day of Nisan, the Passover lamb is set aside. It's put in its pen, kind of like how you'll do maybe a steer that you're going to slaughter, or heifer, whatever it is. and you'll put it in a pen and you'll fatten it up. I don't know if that's what they're doing. But anyway, they set it aside for 5 days, and on the 14th day of Nisan, that's when the Passover lamb is slaughtered. This was an order by God. Timing is important to him. It has to be done, Hebrew, at twilight, which is actually literally between the evenings. If you recall this, we have one evening. The Jews had two. They didn't have one time period that we refer to as noon. That was their first evening. And then their second evening was at 6 p.m. So if it's between the evenings, what time is the Passover lamb being killed? For us, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 p.m. Okay, so keep that all in mind. You have the Passover, the preparation of the Passover, and then you have the celebration of the Passover on the first day of unleavened bread. The lamb is killed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's prepared. Most people, well, that's actually the teaching in Exodus 12. All people who do it correctly are going to roast the animal, and then they're going to eat it after 6 p.m. Why is that important to the Jews? 6 p.m. would signify what for them? That's a new day. All right, so does this make sense? You have the day of preparation for the Passover, where the Passover lamb is killed, and then the celebration of the Passover after 6 p.m., because a new day has, we would say dawn, but for them, would it be dusked? Anyway, a new day has rolled around for them, and that's also the first day of unleavened bread, and then they're going to celebrate that for a whole week. Okay, also in Exodus 12, the first day is very important of unleavened bread, and the last day, the seventh day, is very important. God said these are special days of what? Which you'll see sometimes on feast days and others like them. It's true, celebration, Sabbath. They're special Sabbaths. Okay, we have to be careful with this. Sometimes we get confused. We hear Sabbath and we think, which day? Saturday, seventh day. That's not what Sabbath means, although every seventh day, or to us Saturday, the Jews would observe as a special day. What does the Hebrew term Sabbath actually mean? Rest. That's all that it means. So the Jews have roughly 52 rests every year just from their seventh days. But they also have a number of other specialized rests. And these are also termed Sabbaths. So just because we read Sabbath in the Bible, that does not necessarily mean to us Saturday or seventh day. It just means rest. Usually that's going to be for the Jews on a seventh day or a Saturday, but it's not always that way. All right. I've said all of that to lead into what we're going to be discussing today. So, for all coming in, thank you for being here. We're so glad to have you. We're in Luke 22. We're going to try to cover, if at all possible, the first 38 verses. I think we can. We might. Yes, we have to. Okay. Verse 1. Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called Passover. Now, technically, is the feast of unleavened bread Passover, or is Passover the feast of unleavened bread? No. But they're synonyms for a reason. They're in close proximity to one another, and they're actually kind of intertwined with one another, although they're not exactly the same thing as themselves. But because of their closeness, they are synonyms. And at times people would say Feast of Unleavened Bread, referring to Passover, and Passover referring to Feast of Passover, unleavened bread to Passover. That's what I'm trying to say. Yes, sir? To the Jews, no. Correct. Yeah. So you have the day of Passover being observed, and the preparation day is the day before that. Thank you for that clarification. Now, where it can get a little bit confusing is to us, that would be the same day. But we reckon according to the Roman standard and the Jewish standard is different than ours, right? Okay, good question. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's have just a little bit of discussion about this, but I think we might wait until we get down to verse 7, all right? Verse 2, and the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. And actually, if you don't care, I would like for you to keep your spot in Luke 22 in our text. Turn to Matthew 26. If it's possible, keep your spot over here too. There'll be just a few times we'll compare these two. Matthew really helps to explain a few more of these details. Matthew 26, and we're going to be reading in verses 3 through 5. Matthew 26, starting in verse 3. Then the chief priests and the elders, this is the parallel of what we just read, of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and that's the Roman-appointed high priest, the son-in-law of Annas, who's the more lawful of the two. And they plotted together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. Now, this is key right here. But they said, we wouldn't arrest him and kill him during the feast while it's actually taking place. Why? Lest there be an uproar among the people. This is a holy day. It's a special day when the feast is observed, and actually, it's a day of what? Rest. It's a Sabbath day. And that's way too much effort to be putting forth. There would be a revolt of the people if that much effort were put forth to get Jesus and to kill him on the day that is actually being observed as the Passover. So it's not going to happen then. Keep that in mind. All right, so if you have your marker there, that might be helpful for later. Let's return to our text. Verse 3 of Luke 22. Then Satan entered Judas. That's sad. Surnamed Iscariot, who is numbered among the 12. So he went his way and conferred with the chief priests and captains how he might betray him to them. And as you might guess, they were excited. They were glad, and they agreed, hey, whatever it takes, we'll give you some money. How much money? 30. There you go. 30. 3-0. Yeah, there you go. 30 pieces of silver, and that's found in Matthew's account, chapter 26. We won't turn to and read it. I think we're familiar enough with that. The commentator Robertson says that's equal to about 120 denarii. You're probably familiar with a denarius, and that's a Roman coin that a person would get whenever you'd work a day, average-wise anyway. So 120 of them, that's not chump change. 120, roughly a third of a year's salary, maybe just a little bit beyond that. So think of what it is that you take in to correlate that, cost of living and all that sort of stuff. About a third of your salary for a year, you could get paid to give up Jesus. Okay, so on one side of things, that sounds like a lot of money, but when you consider to give up your hope, your reason, and your Savior, it's nothing. It's pocket change for that. But he agreed with them. Verse 6, he made a promise. He sold his soul, essentially, for 30 pieces of silver, about a third of a year's salary, and sought opportunity to betray him in the absence of the multitude. I might ask this. What do you think the relevance is, if any, of 30 pieces of silver? There's a mathematical side of it. How are we going to get through multiplication here to 30? Biblical numbers of importance. Probably 3 and 10. I mean, I know you could do 2 and 15, but for the Bible numbers, 6 and 5 for that matter, right? But for Bible purposes, actually that would be interesting. I hadn't considered that one. 5 is the number of grace, which we didn't have time to talk about a year ago, and 6 is imperfection. I don't think that would fit, but I do believe 3 and 10 possibly could. The divine number, well, the divine one is being betrayed, and it could be the 10 price for the betrayal of the 3, the divine one, that might be. But you go back to the Old Testament, and there certainly seems to be some relevance here. Exodus chapter 21. Let's read from Exodus 21, where there's this whole host of laws that's being handed out. If someone does this to you, if someone costs you that, so on, all that kind of stuff. Well, here's one of those laws that seems kind of random in the Old Testament. I don't know that it was really random when it's all said and done. Verse 32 of that place, Exodus 21. If an ox gores a slave, male or female, probably the person's either going to die or at the very least be incapacitated. So if an ox gores a slave, male or female, the owner shall give to the master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. We find out right back here, that's if you want a slave, that's going to be the cost. That would be the replacement cost right here of a slave, so it would seem to be the cost going into purchasing a slave. And I think that might be the relevance, that Jesus is being treated no more as just a peasant, or if not even below that, a slave. Really, the value that is put on his life and a connection with him is absolutely nothing when we understand how invaluable the Lord truly is. Our text 22:6 of Luke, so he promised and sought opportunity to betray him to them, but this is going to be in the absence of the multitude. Verse 7, then came the day of unleavened bread, when the Passover must be killed. This seems like a contradiction all of itself. Then came the day of unleavened bread. The first day of unleavened bread is what day? When the Passover is observed, but we're told when the Passover must be killed, the Passover lamb that is. When was the Passover lamb killed? The day before. Okay, the day before. So it sounds like a contradiction. Then came the day of unleavened bread. The only possibility would be the first one of those when Passover is observed. But we're told when the Passover must be killed, which is actually the day prior. It sounds like a contradiction. How do we make sense of this? There you go. There you go. Or for some, September. In retail, in September, Christmas begins. Yeah, that's about right, Marty. Stay with me on this. Keep your spot. We're going to go to a few different places. I'm going to tell you this. When you read through all the gospel accounts on this, it sounds initially very contradictory. But I'm going to show you why it's not contradictory at all, and actually they're all teaching exactly the same thing. So let's begin in Mark, the 14th chapter, out of our passage. Mark's account, believed to be the first of the gospel accounts penned. First two verses. And we read this one in Matthew, so this ought to remind us. Verse 1, Mark 14, it was now 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him, for they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people. All right, let's try for just a second to forget what we read from Luke, because I think this is going to help, okay? And then we'll go back to Luke and tie it all in when it's all said and done. So, you read Mark 14, 1 and 2. We need to get a hold of this guy and we're going to kill him. They said, there's no way that we can do it during the feast. We'll have a rebellion on our hands. Does it sound like this happens the first day of Passover? Or the observance of Passover, the first day of unleavened bread? No. That's not their intention at all. They know that the culture, the city's not going to hold together if they do that. So that's not going to work. Turn to John's account, chapter 13. And I really appreciate what's believed to be the final of all these accounts composed, because I think John's account actually makes it clear, but at first it's going to sound like John contradicts all of the others. John 13, the first two verses. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, ... We're not studying John, so we're going to quit right there. I simply want to point this out. It's stated that this setting is before the feast of the Passover, before it's observed. Now, an objection could be made in verse 2. During supper. Well, they hadn't eaten supper yet and observed the Passover, and there they do. We do know this much. By verse 1, it was still before the feast of the Passover. Does it continue to be that when Jesus is betrayed, when he's arrested, and when he goes through everything that he does? Turn over to chapter 18 of John. It's the same book. John 18, 28th verse. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. This is after the supper with the apostles that takes place in chapter 13, after the washing of feet, after the instituting of the Lord's Supper. And he's already been taken into custody. You look earlier in chapter 18, That night is done. The setting is complete. It's now early morning, and this is the day that he's going to die. Listen to this. The Jews, though, themselves did not enter into the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but so that they could eat the Passover. Sound like Passover is now complete? Or is it still, chapter 13, verse 1, before the Passover? Passover hasn't been eaten yet on the day that Jesus dies. Okay, so keep that in mind. And now I ask you to look at chapter 19 of John. Chapter 19, at the very end, verse 42. So because of the Jewish day, key word used, of preparation, since the tomb was close at hand, they laid Jesus there. This is a preparation day when Jesus dies. We're told it's before the Passover. So when the Passover is observed, that's the first day of unleavened bread, right? And the day before the Passover is observed, we know that is what day of the Jews? The preparation day, right? Now I want you to look in the same chapter, same book, so John 19, in verse 14, just to make very clear, because some might think, well, we're talking about the preparation day of the Sabbath, like the seventh day rest. That's not what this is. John tells us in no uncertain terms, verse 14, now it was what day? If you look at the heading in your text, chapter 19, Jesus has been delivered to be crucified. And in what follows right after verse 14, Jesus is crucified. He dies. Verse 14, now it was what day? The day Jesus died, the preparation day of the Passover. Why is that significant? It's not the day the Passover feast is being observed. When Jesus sits down with his apostles to eat the meal, I realize in places it's called the Passover, but in others we're told very clearly that it was not the day the Passover was being observed. It was actually the preparation day of the Passover. And if you're wondering, how can that be? Because it's not the same thing. I agree. On the same plane, it's not the same thing. But there's some history behind this. Allow me to read to you from the Beacon Bible Commentary on Matthew, and this comes from page 233, and this is a quotation from Josephus. You know him, the first century Jewish historian. As far as we know, he wasn't a Christian. He seems to be pretty impressed by Jesus in his writings, but as far as we can tell, he wasn't a Christian. Hopefully he was. But he says about his people, the Jews, we keep a feast for, time out. How many days did the Jews keep a feast during unleavened bread? 7 days. You have the first day, holy day, day of rest, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Day 7, holy day, perfection. Day of rest. So there's 7 days that an actual feast is kept, right? Listen to what Josephus writes, who's a contemporary of Jesus. We Jews keep a feast for 8 days, which is called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. What happened is, over time, it started to be counted as 8 days that the feast was observed instead of 7. Now, why do you think that would be the case? It's a prep day. And one of the main things happening on the prep day, at the conclusion of that day, the Jews, as they count at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, between the evenings, is they're killing the Passover lamb. But something else they do in preparation for, you listen to this, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. What do you think they're doing in preparation for those 7 days? There you go. Getting rid of all the leaven in their house, baking a lot of bread for the days that are going to be upcoming, and especially probably for the day of rest, because you don't want to put forth a lot of effort, right, on that day. You prepare for that day, working, if anything, a little extra so that you don't have to work on that day. So, on this preparation day, the houses have been ridded of all leaven, and they start baking all this bread. So naturally, on the day of preparation, what are you going to have in the house to eat? Unleavened bread. And as usual, you're going to have your, the land that flows with milk and honey, or at least once did, and all the grapevines. You're going to have your grape juice also that you're typically drinking. So keep that in mind. So to the Jews, after roughly 1,500 years of celebration of the Feast of Passover, it's not 7 days, but 8 days that they now count, because that's what they have in their house to eat, which is largely the same thing they're going to be eating for the next 7 days following that. So Josephus, we keep a feast for 8 days, which is called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Passover and unleavened bread are used interchangeably a lot of times with each other. So I think that's the reason that when we read in Scripture, Jesus saying, this is the Passover, I'm going to observe this Passover with you, but elsewhere we know very clearly it's actually the preparation day of the Passover. He's using and eating what's already available that's being prepared for the day of rest. The start of the preparations are being made. All right, now what I want to do before we move on, though, is show you how the gospel accounts do not contradict each other, but they're actually in complete agreement on this subject. And I say that because at first glance it sounds like Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptics, are all in agreement that Jesus dies on the first day of unleavened bread, the Passover observed, and that John sounds like he's the only knucklehead not agreeing with all the rest. Let me show you why that's not the case at all. Turn to Matthew chapter 27. We're going to briefly look at each one of them. You see what I was saying? We could have spent the whole class on it, and I know it's been a good chunk, but we will move on after this. Matthew 27, verse 62. Next day, okay, you look at what's taking place here. Back in verse 45 and following, the death of Christ, 57 and after, Jesus has already been buried. Next day, that is after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate, ... We're not in Matthew class, so we're going to stop there. Matthew makes clear that the day before when Jesus died was what day? Not the first day of unleavened bread or the Passover observed, but the day of preparation prior to the Passover. Now turn to Mark's account, back to, I should say, chapter 15. Mark 15, 42 and 43. And when evening had come, evening when? What's taking place here on this day? Verse 21, crucifixion. Jesus has already died, 33 and following. And when evening had come, 42, since it was the day of preparation, that is the day before the Sabbath, that does not mean the day before Saturday. A lot of times it does. All it means is the day before the rest, the special rest that was going to be occurring. But as Mark tells us, that was the day of preparation that Jesus had given his life. Yes, sir. Okay. and I'm going to guess I could go either way on that. Yeah. No, but thank you. Yeah, the translators might have seen some significance in that for sure. Turn to Luke's account, chapter 23. Final of the synoptics, those that see together. Luke 23, verse 54. It, that's a pronoun. What is it? Talking about a day. You go back, crucifixion's transpired, verse 26. Jesus has died, 44 and following. Jesus is being buried, starting in 50. We're in 54 of Luke 23. It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. So all of these say the same thing, preparation, preparation, preparation. Well, the preparation of what? Now, some of these say, in the gospel accounts, the preparation of the Sabbath. That does not mean seventh. It means the preparation of a rest. What rest? What day is being observed that's of religious significance here? Go back to John. John chapter 19. And then we'll return to ours of Luke. John 19 and verse 31. John says, since it was the day of preparation, and so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath or on the rest, for that Sabbath or that rest was a high day. High as contrasted with lower or more normal. You know, when something's high, you're not used to that. Say, the river's high. Okay, you know, that puts us on extra alert, but normally it's not up there, right? That's what he's saying here. This isn't a normal Sabbath. It's one that's higher than the others, this rest. Because this day of preparation is not for a seventh-day Sabbath. Look back at verse 14 again of John 19. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. So the next day is a special day of rest. And I want to show you just one more of these before we move on. Sorry, I told you I would, but Matthew 28, verse 1. I'm going to guess none of our Bible versions get this, and I hope I'm wrong. I don't think any of our Bible versions translate this correctly. I only know of one that does, and it is not at all widely used. It's a literal translation of Scripture, and that's why it's translated so strictly and reads correctly. Young's literal translation is the only one I know that gets this right. Matthew 28, verse 1. Now, after the Sabbath, Jesus is about to rise from the dead. After the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. Okay, so we read this, and we've commonly thought, okay, there's only one Sabbath here, and it's Saturday, and now Jesus is going to rise from the dead. I agree. After Saturday, he rises from the dead, and that's a Sabbath that's observed. Does anyone have here the plural for that noun, Sabbath, in your Bible translation? I checked many of them. I didn't find a single one except for this one. Young's literal translation is the only one of which I'm aware that gets this correct. Sabbaths, plural, from the original text. There was not one Sabbath that Jesus was in the grave. There were a multiplicity of them. And what it seems to be is there is a special Sabbath which takes place on Friday when Jesus is already in the grave. And then there's another Sabbath satisfying the plural on Saturday that he's in the grave before, on the first day of the week, he rises from the grave. This is a unique time for the Jews where you have back-to-back Sabbaths because of how the calendar fell that year. And that's what Matthew tells us. So you put all of this together. Is there a preparation for a Sabbath? Yes, but it's not the preparation for the seventh day. It's the preparation for a Sabbath that occurs on a Friday, which is the first day of unleavened bread, the day the Passover feast is observed. So Jesus is going to go into the tomb, I'm convinced, not on Friday, as traditionally thought, but he goes into the tomb on late Thursday, or as the day of Friday just begins to turn. He is crucified. It's essential to fulfill Old Testament prophecy. He is crucified not on the first day of unleavened bread, after all the Passover lambs have been killed, but on the very day that all the Passover lambs had been killed. All the gospel accounts are in agreement. He dies on the day of preparation when the Passover lambs are going to be slaughtered. Coincidentally, on the day of preparation, at what time are all the Passover lambs killed? 3 o'clock, between the evenings. Exodus 12 reads most of our translations at twilight, literally in the Hebrew is between the evenings. 12 and 6, between the two is 3 o'clock. What time are we told that Jesus died on the cross? The 9th hour. Jews start counting at, I know there's a lot to this. Jews start counting at 6 a.m., the daylight hours. 6 plus 9, but using a clock gets you to where? 15. No! Using a clock gets you to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Do you see the importance of this subject? If Jesus dies the day Passover is observed and when the feast is being eaten, he's not the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. But when he dies on the day of preparation, the very hour, in the very minute the Passover lambs are being slaughtered, he becomes the fulfillment of it. Joe? Outstanding, Joe. You said it far better than what I can. Everything is pieced together intricately in the mind of God over 2,000 years. And I really like Galatians chapter 4, verse 4, Joe. When the fullness or the perfection of the time had come, God, first of all, sent his Son. I mean, it's not just his death. It's his birth. It's his life. Every piece of his life has to be at the exact perfect moment to lead up to this being the day that the Jews fully reject him, put him to death, down to the very hour, down to the very minute. It has to be perfection on the part of God. Who else could do that but him? Joe, I appreciate so much what you said. Yes, sir. It's plural, yes. And for some reason, I don't know why, all of our circulated translations, mine, the two I use included, they miss it. I don't know. Yeah, but it should read Sabbaths. And I would probably put it as a lowercase, Marty, if it were me. It's just general rests. There have been 2 rests. Yeah, good question. Okay, well, I know we spent most of our time on that. I'm not surprised. Let's go ahead and try to cover as much of the remaining as we can. I think we're pretty familiar with it anyway. So verse 8 of Luke 22, where we left off, and he sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat." This seems to be the Jewish traditional way by this point of looking at Passover, unleavened bread. It's not just being 7 days of celebration, but 8 days. And I think he's talking about, hey, once we've ridded the house of all the leaven and we've been baking bread, on the day of preparation, we can eat this Passover, or this first day of the 8 days that we celebrate together. So they said to him, "Where do you want us to prepare?" And he said to them, "Behold, when you have entered the city, a man will meet you, carrying a pitcher of water," attention to detail, "follow him into the house which he enters. Then you shall say to the master of the house, the teacher says to you, where is the guest room, that I may eat the Passover with my disciples?" I think this is another guy with whom Jesus is familiar and probably has a very close relationship. "Then he will show you a large furnished upper room. There make ready." So they went and found it just as he had said to them, and they prepared the Passover. When the hour had come, he sat down, and the 12 apostles with him. He said to them, "With fervent desire I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say to you, I will no longer eat of it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God." Then he took the cup and gave thanks and said, "Take this and divide it among yourselves. This is a dinner setting, don't forget." And the way this works is that everybody had their own drinking vessel in front of them. And at intervals of this week-long, 8 if you want to count the Jewish traditional way, as Jesus is doing here with the disciples of celebrating, there would be a large cup that would be taken down and passed around, and the people would use that then to fill up their cups, and then they would all drink from that. And this is the way, just the feast. I mean, think about Thanksgiving dinner. How does it work at your house? All right, so everyone's sitting there, and mom or grandma brings out the 2-liter of Coca-Cola and says, "All right, everybody take this, and you can have this and drink it." Well, does everyone pass it around? I mean, that's not the way you eat dinner, right? That's not the way they eat dinner either. They carried around commonly their own drinking vessel. And so they all had their own drinking vessel poured out, and the cup was handed to them, a larger vessel, and then they would pour the juice into their cups going around. "Take this and divide it among yourselves. For I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." Verse 19, "And he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, This is my body which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Likewise, I find that very relevant. That is perfect timing, Miss English. So, likewise is an adverb, okay? And it's describing actually the manner in which something is done. Likewise means in the same or in exactly the same way. He also took the cup after supper. So it's important to understand first what he did for the bread. What did he do for the bread? He took it, prayed over it, gave thanks, and he broke it or divided it up and then gave it to them. So after supper, he does the same thing with the cup as he's done with the bread, which would mean he takes it, he prays over it, and then he does what? He divvies it up between all of them before it's consumed, just like they did. If verse 17 is referring to before the supper, it kind of sounds like in Luke's account it is. I'm not entirely convinced of that. I think it's possible. I'm open to it. I don't think it really changes anything. But even if this is after supper, verse 20, the terminology says he did the same thing with the cup, verse 17, that he did during supper. It was given to them, given thanks, said divide it. After it was divided, it was consumed. And he said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you. But behold, the hand of my betrayer is with me on the table. And truly the Son of Man goes as it has been determined." It's already been fixed. This is not an accident, Joe. What's about to take place with me and all that will be accomplished through that. Actually, later on, when we get to 24, chapter 24 of Luke, he'll say, "O foolish and slow of heart, do you not realize that everything that has happened with me is what was written in the law, and the prophets, and the Psalms? God had prepared for eternity all of this that transpired with me, the rejection, the suffering, and now the lifting up of Christ." Okay, so we're in verse, where are we? 20. The hand of the betrayer is upon me. Oh, there we go. 22, sorry. "Truly the Son of Man goes as has been determined, but woe to that man betrayed." Then they began to question among themselves which of them it was to do this thing. Boy, you would wonder, wouldn't you? One of you is in big trouble. Oh boy, is it me? We all know our weaknesses, right? And I think they're introspectively considering this, and for good reason. Verse 24, there's lots of internal issues to go around. "Now there was a dispute among them as to which of them could be considered the greatest." And I think this is really sad, especially when this conversation takes place. It's when Jesus is announced, "Hey, I'm about to be betrayed and taken away." The disciples realize, number one here. And now they're all concerned about who's number two. What happens to number two when number one gets taken out of the way? Number two becomes number one. I think they're wanting to be the replacement of Jesus. He said to them, "The kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors or given fancy titles." I think it's the concept here. Excuse me. "But not so among you. On the contrary," excuse me, "he who is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he who governs as he who serves. For who is greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? You would think, is it not he who sits at the table? Yet you understand I am the greatest, and I am the one among you who serves." So who's really the greatest? The one who is served or the one who serves? Understanding the greatest is the one who serves. "But you are those who have continued with me in my trials, and I bestow upon you a kingdom, just as my Father bestowed one upon me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel." That's a fascinating concept. We don't have time really to delve into it. The question is, how do the apostles end up judging the world? I thought that's Jesus who does that. I could show you passages where the Queen of Sheba is going to do judging in the end, and Sodom and Gomorrah are going to judge people in the end, and that we're going to judge people in the end, and we're going to actually judge angels also in the end. I don't think it's like we literally hands-on are going to do the judging of people, but it's like Noah, when he constructed an ark based on God's instruction, we're told that he condemned the world. By which he condemned the world, he did what was right. And I think that's all that's being stated there. Probably by their righteous lives, doing what God told them, they'll judge the world. Verse 31, "And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, indeed, Satan has asked for you," we'll have this in our sermon a little later, "that he may sift you as wheat, but I have prayed for you, that your faith should not fail, and when you've returned to me, strengthen your brethren. But he said to him, Lord, I'm ready to go with you both to prison and to death. He said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster shall not crow this day before you will deny 3 times that you know me. Mark's account, I believe it is, states that the rooster crows twice. All right, who would like to say our memory verses? We wind up these last couple verses. Luke 22:35. Roy? Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, either way, I think probably proves it, though, don't you? The point being this, when Jesus sent the disciples out on the limited commission, imagine going on a missionary trip and you don't take with you any shoes, you don't take along a suitcase, and you don't take along a wallet or a purse, any cash, of course, on a mission trip, it might not help anyway, any credit cards. How's that going to work? Well, Jesus had told them, I want you to go on this limited missionary trip. Don't take shoes, Don't take a backpack or suitcase. Don't take any cash, any cards on you. And he says, how did that work when I told you that? How many of you lacked for anything? And either they said nothing or they responded saying, we lack nothing. When God says it, it comes to pass even when it doesn't make mathematical sense. Verse 36, then he said to them, but now he who has a money bag, let him take it. He didn't intend for this to be an absolute for all circumstances. Now, when I send you out on a mission trip, take your wallet, take your purse, take your cards. You're going to use them. I was just proving a point to you. And likewise, a suitcase or an overnight bag, a knapsack. And he who has no sword, let him sell one. Let him sell his garment and buy one. For I say to you that this which is written still must be accomplished in me. He was numbered with the transgressors, for the things concerning me have an end. So they said, Lord, look, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, it is enough. And concluding on that, I'm going to have you to contemplate for the next time we get together, what was the purpose of Jesus telling the disciples to take along weapons with them on their journey? And we'll talk about that the next time that we're together. I imagine probably quite a few of you in here have seen the movie. Some of us maybe not. But you remember the Green Mile, a number of you? Sad, isn't it? Sad story. Jesus is walking his own green mile here over these next couple of lessons that we're going to have to finish up Luke. Please read in preparation for that the final 33 verses of chapter 22. So it's going to pick up with 39 on through the end of the chapter, 71. And then let's memorize verse 44. Pretty cool passage, Luke 22:44. All right, before we break though, before worship, any final comments? Okay, thanks.